Obviously, this is a very tough act to follow, very great panel in the last session. So our two speakers in this session are under a great amount of pressure to at least match that level of intensity and wealth of information. We do have, however, two excellent and distinguished speakers with us today who will talk about the digital dimension of the media. We first will hear from Ross Tapsell, the convener, one of the two conveners of this conference, who is also a lecturer in the School of Culture, History and Language. Ross has focused on the media in his research for the last decade or so. He's currently preparing his second book on this issue, and he will talk to us about the rise of digital conglomerates in the media sector. Our second speaker will be Usman Hamid, who will be known to many of you, especially those of you from Indonesia, who's been a long-term activist for human rights, has been once heading Contras. He has also been deeply involved with change.org. And in the last 2 years completed an MPhil here at the Australian National University and was just awarded that very degree a few weeks ago. And he will talk about the state crackdown on online expression of freedom of opinion. We will do the Q&A a bit differently from the normal format. So we will have Ross speaking first and go straight into the Q&A after the first presentation. So 10 minutes of Q&A. Ross has important business to attend to, so we'll leave us after that. And then Usman will speak and we'll have a separate Q&A session after his talk as well. But without further ado, please welcome Ross Tapsell for his talk on conglomerates in the digital space.
Thank you, Marcus, and indeed much pressure after that wonderful last panel. I'm going to talk today about the impact of digitalisation on the media industry, and I guess you could argue that of all the industries, digital media or digitalisation and the internet has impacted the media first and perhaps most profoundly. Many business models of the media industry have been in complete disarray because of the arrival of the internet. I don't need to explain this to you. You know this because of the decline of circulation for many newspapers, the rise of mobile phone penetration leading to young people accessing news via the internet and mobile phone. But the general issue around the fragmentation of the internet versus the consolidation of the industry allowed or enabled by digitalisation. I'm going to talk to you about the rise of digital conglomerates in Indonesia, and I'm defining digital conglomerates as national Jakarta-based companies whose portfolios include television, radio, print and online platforms, all of them, as well as having communications infrastructure companies. So this is a trend that we've seen, and it's a growing trend in Indonesia, and I think it has important implications for freedom of the press, for the political economy of the media. And then I'll finally get to some of the issues that Bede touched upon, which is looking at certain families owning certain conglomerates. But first, let me just take you back to, I guess, the start of what we'd call the digital era. Now, most of this I'll speed through because you know a lot of this. Generally speaking, ownership of household radios has declined in Indonesia. Generally speaking, I could talk for a long time about radio and the future of radio and the fragmentation of radio, but in a nutshell, I think until someone invents or creates the Netflix of radio, radio seems to still be kind of fragmented. Community radio exists, but radio ownership, listenership is declining. TV remains king in Indonesia. When you look at any of these surveys about how do people get their news and information, it's generally always answered around 80% to 90% will say television. I'll come to why this is important later. And finally, of course, where internet penetration rises, print circulation declines. We know that around the world. That's the case as well in Indonesia. There is a local print media market in Indonesia. Most of it is dominated by Jawa Post Group and Kompas Group. But even within the local media, local print media, most of it survives on government advertising or government advertorials. By advertorials, I mean, you know, this is what the government's done lately. Someone has written this up and they paid for it to be in the newspaper. In some cases, it's about 75% in some local newspapers of their money comes from government advertising advertorials. So if you took that money away, the local print media industry would probably collapse. That's a pretty big deal. So generally speaking, the decline of the print media industry, the uncertainty around radio and the prominence of television has meant that people are now buying other platforms in what we call the convergence era. And this is particularly the case for print media, who've realised that there's potentially no future in the print media. And so what they've done is that they've tried to be this multi-platform environment. I've got a screenshot here of around 2012, the Jakarta Globe website, largely just to show you here that you've got Jakarta Globe for Twitter, BlackBerry, Facebook, YouTube, live streaming television, because people are thinking that the future of television will be live streamed, and so you've now got to have your television station as well as your news site, your opinion site, and your sort of citizen journalism site there, My Jakarta. So that's the kind of multi-platform environment that we're looking at here. And obviously the companies who started in television have more capital and more money to do this well than those who started in print. But basically everybody's doing the same thing. They're all trying to be a multi-platform conglomerate. Here's an example of Kompas, which of course, concerns over the future of the print media industry. Kompas has gone as audience attention spans drop. They've made the paper smaller. They've got Kompas TV, Kompas.com, Kompas for your iPhone, for your BlackBerry, Kompasiana, a citizen journalism site, and importantly, investments in communications infrastructure. And this is also part of the big game of competing in the digital era for the media industry, is that one cannot just be a content provider, one also has to be a network provider as well. Why? Because when Kompas TV was trying to show its TV stations on other network providers, they would push them out, as you would do. So Hari Tano's or MNC Group was not keen on having Kompas TV on their pay TV station. And so what we've seen is media owners and companies purchasing satellites, cable television companies, cable television operators, and so on. So in short, what this means is big media has become bigger in the digital era. When you think of a company like Detik.com, which started as just an independent online company, it was soon purchased by a big conglomerate in 2011, off the top of my head, 2011, Khairul Tanjung's Transcorp for $60 million US. And this is happening all around the media industry. People are buying up other platforms, companies are buying up other platforms, or they're starting their own, in the case of, say, Kompas TV. Tempo is doing the same thing. They tried Tempo TV, they tried merging with Radio 68H, and they've tried Tempo Interactive and Tempo.co and so on. Everybody feels they've got to be multi-platform. The result of which, I conclude, is that there's really 8 major conglomerates in Indonesia. And I've listed them roughly in order of sort of market share and what I would say as dominance, market dominance. But the point here, you don't need to go into great detail, but the point here is that everybody has a TV station, flagship, online and print, as well as radio, and of course is investing in communications infrastructure. Why does this matter? Well, isn't 8 different companies a really good thing? I mean, when you look at Singapore or Malaysia or even Australia, having 8 different media companies seems perfectly great. I mean, what's the problem? The problem is, in Melina Lim's study in 2011, she said there were 12. In Ignatius Haryanto's study in 2012, he said there are 11. And now in 2016, I'm saying there are 8. So we're all talking, those of us in this field are looking at the increasing conglomeration of the industry. Also, the problem that I see with this is that the business models of these digital conglomerates all basically look the same. They're all attempting to become national, Jakarta-based, multi-platform companies where news content becomes centralised and homogenised within each particular company. The game plan is the same for everyone. Take as much of the mainstream Indonesian media, audience share in as many platforms as possible and build an ecosystem of linked media and online business and communications infrastructure. I'll get to this ecosystem later. But the point is, I don't see a major difference in any of these business models. Everybody's trying to conglomerate each other, and so probably the next to go will be Media Group and maybe Bakri Group and so on. The general tendency, too, of these large conglomerates is to mimic each other in content production and journalistic professional practice. As you've probably been aware, poor old Ibu Sri, they're having to contend with the media scrum. Interview elites in Jakarta and produce stories around quotes from these elites. Think, for example, of the way that LGBTI issues were discussed in Indonesia earlier in the year. What does Hendro Priyono think about LGBTI? What does Abrizal Bakri think about LGBTI? And so Marcus, we don't want to know. But unfortunately, that that was the kind of modus operandi of journalists. What do the elites in Jakarta say on this issue? And short, sharp, snappy quotes which were produced for online content or 24-hour news. So I don't see a lot of depth in the coverage. I don't see a lot of difference in the coverage. And it's increasingly Jakarta-centric. And while it is true, I'm not doing a content analysis for my book. I haven't gone through everyone in enormous depth in content, but other people have. And let me summarise what I think are the key points from some of this. And Yanhua CIPG group has found that around 60% of the news really comes from Jakarta. So that, of course, kind of proves the Jakarta-centric nature of the news. But also, it is true that these media companies generally compete, while they compete with each other, they're all owned by successful business leaders, and their media generally reports in a pro-business direction. These digital conglomerates produce regular stories attributing Indonesia's upper and middle class upward mobility to a pro-business mindset. This is played out in various ways, such as negative attitudes towards pro-poor government policies, which might affect business profits, such as, for example, the raising of the minimum wage, and negative coverage of other anti-establishment practices, such as, say, protests or labour union campaigns. Others have argued, and this one I'm not too sure about, the technocratic ministers are often seen to understand business interests better and so are encouraged in the mainstream media more, rather than those who might question the role of big business in contributing to rising inequality. I'm a bit cautious of that because I know we have some technocratic former ministers in the audience who may disagree with that. But these are this is what people say when they write about content. At the same time, the mainstream media propagates positive images of successful businessmen and politicians as self-made heroes, including regular coverage of media owners themselves who are portrayed as pragmatic, non-ideological thinkers who have made their fortunes through the private sector and successful market dominance. So for those media oligarchs running for politics, they often use their increased wealth as an example of their pro-business attitudes, leading to improved prosperity for the common people through jobs and business growth and so on. And so I think Indonesians' understanding of so-called business values is being slightly co-opted or largely co-opted by mainstream media, both via growing conglomerate control of the media, but also even as a result of the growth of connections between media conglomerates, e-commerce, and even private educational institutions such as Riyadi's University of Pelita Harapan, Bakri University, and various others. If all that sounds slightly a bit too Marxist approach for you, I'm sorry. I mean, I am working on a Saturday, so maybe I've just become a bit too Marxist. But generally speaking, and this is the Forbes Rich List from 2007 through to 2015, and I'm arguing that in the digital era, media owners have become more wealthy, more politically powerful and more dynastic. And this is just a quick snapshot of wealth, of how these media owners have gained in wealth in the digital era. Now, this is not to say that all their wealth is gained by their media companies, although in the case of Haritano and Khairul Tanjung, a large part of it is from the successful media companies and the conglomeration of media. But generally, media owners, with the notable exception of Abriz al-Bakri, which we know had the disaster, Lapindo disaster, which has moved him from being Indonesia's richest man to not even in the top 40 list of 2015. For the most part, everybody has gained wealth. Media owners are now more politically powerful. We know this because the 2014 election saw the most partisan coverage of politics, far more partisan than Indonesia's election of 2009 or 2004, I would argue. People say, well, that's because there were two candidates and they were so different, and it was always going to, you know, mothers were against fathers and husbands were against wives, and so of course that would be the case in the media. But certainly I would argue that the fact that media owners are now far more connected to politics, in some cases owning political parties, sees a far more partisan media environment. And this comes about because of the wealth that they've been able to propagate. When you think of, say, the rise of Haritano Sudibyo as now owning a political party, the importance of Khairul Tanjung to SBY's parliament, in some cases, you know, selecting ministers. What is also interesting is that these media companies are now more dynastic. So media owners are placing their sons into the media companies. And they often have titles of digital media specialist, digital CEO, etc., etc. I think this is actually interesting because when you think of, say, the Bakri company starting in coal and commodities and so on, to select to put his sons into media is really a change of direction, perhaps, in the importance of these companies. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong, nothing inherently wrong with that. Many companies put their sons into their own businesses, but obviously when there's a clash between family interests and journalistic ethics, family interests win out. What are these sons doing? For the most part, they're looking at the new media scene and they're trying to think about how do we first get people to pay for news online, because for the most part people don't want to, and second, how do we create a kind of digital ecosystem? The Bakris invested in social media site Path, Haritano has invested in WeChat, MTech has bought up BlackBerry, the Sariat Majas there with Bukalapak. Veed Moore showed you a similar thing in the e-commerce industry, and of course others are starting up their own, such as Kompasiana. And the general idea is to link media with messaging sites, with purchasing anything online, gaming, transport, whatever it might be. The basic way is to think about being a large digital conglomerate. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you completely, let me show you some help from another pasty white guy with a bit more money in Mark Zuckerberg. Here's what he's trying to do. Oh, no, that didn't work.
So now that Messenger has scaled, we're starting to develop ecosystems around it. And the first thing we're doing is exploring how you can all communicate with businesses. Now, you probably interact with dozens of businesses every day, and some of them are probably really meaningful to you. But I've never met anyone who likes calling a business. And no one wants to have to install a new app for every service or business that they want to interact with. So we think that there's got to be a better way to do this. We think that you should just be able to message a business in the same way you'd message a friend. You should get a quick response, and it shouldn't take your full attention like a phone call would, and you shouldn't have to install a new app. So today we're launching Messenger Platform, so you can build bots for Messenger. And it's a simple platform. It's powered by artificial intelligence, so you can build natural language services to communicate directly with people. So let's take a look. So CNN, for example, is going to be able to send you a daily digest of stories right into Messenger. And the more you use it, the more personalized it'll get. And if you want to learn about a specific topic, like, say, the Supreme Court nomination or the Zika virus, you just send a message and it'll send you that information. Or take 1-800-Flowers. I love this one.
All right, thanks, Mark. I'll call you back. What, of course, Mark didn't want to tell you was that a large part of these ecosystems won't be, you know, oh, let's take 1-800-Flowers, for example. It will be connections and partnerships that Facebook has, and this will be exactly the same with these ecosystems that these Indonesian conglomerates are developing. Business links, business partnerships, and those connections to messenger sites, to citizen journalism sites, to social media sites. They'll all be this one big digital conglomerate. So, in conclusion, are we looking really, is the idea of media dead? Is the idea of a content-based media company at least now not really relevant in the digital era? What exactly is a media company in the digital age? It's not as clear as it used to be. Even Uber and Gojek, they all claim to be a media company. They do that to get around laws around transportation, of course, but it does make us question what really is the future of news, given that people are not prepared to pay for news individually as yet, and so companies are trying to encourage consumers to pay for goods and services online through other attempts, stickers, dating sites, event sites, transport, and so on. Yes, Facebook and Google threaten the market. They threaten the market because they gain the majority of online advertising around the world, particularly in Indonesia. So digital conglomerates, such as those 8 conglomerates that I listed earlier, will say, well, we're under real threat from global conglomerates, global digital conglomerates such as Facebook and Google. And even perhaps regional digital conglomerates. We've seen Singaporean and Koreans buy up parts of Indonesian online news sites and social media sites. However, I'm seeing much more trend in partnerships with Indonesian conglomerates and global companies. That is probably more the future. When Zuckerberg was talking about CNN, just replace that with, say, Transcorp or something like that. There'll be a partnership arrangement. But it does lead us to wonder, who else will own a media company in the digital age, given the dominance of capital and the conglomeracy which is involved in this digital media era? Thanks very much.
As I said, we're going straight into Q&A. So can I have, please, 3 questioners? I have Hal here, Tony. Anyone else? Yes, please.
So I'm Hal Hill from ANU. Ross, terrific talk. One question is, as all the ads have gone online, and therefore no longer in the newspapers haven't been able to cross-subsidise high-quality journalism, you know, the investigative kind of long-term journalism. Are we seeing that also in Indonesia?
Yeah, financially, Tempo magazine is still doing quite well. People are still buying Tempo magazine, subscribing to Tempo magazine. So let's hope, Hal, that in the future they will continue there. Koran Tempo doesn't make money. Tempo.co doesn't make money. Tempo TV was a disaster, I'm sorry. And radio, so Tempo's attempt to be a big conglomerate really failed. And that's a concern for investigative journalism sites like Tempo. Frankly, no. I don't mean to be too depressing, but there's no evidence yet that people are willing to pay en masse for investigative journalism.
I'll stand up because the mic doesn't work too well. In the contestation between centralisation and fragmentation, I'm interested in how it's language. Can we assume that this kind of conglomeratization, centralization means ultimately the death of every language except Indonesia and English? Or are there niches emerging, as there were with radio once in the 80s and cassettes and so forth, for local expressions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. To be honest, I haven't really thought much about the language issue, but I would probably say that certainly in a niche market audience community radio can still exist. Of course, if you've anyone who's seen community radio in Indonesia knows that it really runs on the smell of an oily rag, and so it's not really a financially viable company. But the conglomeration of local print has been through Jawa Post Group, Kompas Group. So anytime you go to a province in Indonesia and you say Makassar Tribune or Lombok Post or Radar Bali, for example, they're all part of a larger conglomerate, and so they're all going to be in the national language, and that's where the print media industry is headed. Again, this is not to say that there won't be blogs and online sites and enormous fragmentation which the internet allows. I'm looking particularly at professional media. So people will be blogging in Javanese and so on, I'm sure, but and tweeting and so on. But for the most part, professional media, niche market, certainly niche market language news is not really possible unless, say, for example, in fact, what they're trying to do, the bigger conglomerates, are trying to get more Mandarin or English. So you see them now providing Mandarin language news. I haven't seen much Arabic, but certainly Mandarin to get the Chinese Indonesians and the overseas Chinese thinking about investments in the e-commerce industry. So we're probably more likely to see conglomerates pushing more towards Mandarin and English rather than local languages.
Thanks. Stephen Fitzpatrick from The Australian. A little related to Hal's question, actually, but I was thinking more broadly about journalistic practice generally rather than investigative journalism specifically. So we'd seen, I guess it was the received wisdom that post-1998 we'd seen a sort of a more rigorous approach being taken to journalism for structural reasons. You know, there's a simple ability to be more rigorous, more inquiring, inquiring, I guess, in journalism. And there was a seizing of the ability to do that over time. And I'm wondering whether what you're describing here, Ross, is in fact a reversal, a sort of going back into the cocoon of not being prepared to investigate certain things, to explore certain things, to make accusations, and all the rest of that. You know, what we generally regard as constituting good journalistic practice.
Certainly at the local level, there's two arguments. The local level at a journalistic practice. One is, of course, when local media is reliant so much on advertorials and advertising from local government, means that you're not seeing, critical accounts, particularly, let's say, for example, Papua. But generally, since decentralisation, you've seen more money into local government, and they're spending an enormous amount of that money sort of on humas, on sort of public relations, which means that journalists are less likely, I think, to question those authorities because they're relying on them for money. Having said that, let's take a positive look at this conglomeration and say that because they're part of a big conglomerate, there is a more professional structure in training, in kind of hiring and firing. And although people are still paid low wages in local areas, being part of the Jawa Post Group probably means that you are part of a structure which, at least in its kind of instruction, says do not take the envelope. While some of these sort of more locally produced ones, which were kind of ad hoc, very envelope journalism, particularly after '98, was really prevalent. So you could argue that they're still performing an important function, and that's the delivery of information. It may not be highly critical, but it is more professional than some of the others which operated after Reformasi.
We have time for one more question. Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation, Ross. Thank you for updating us about the media ownership in Indonesia today. Yesterday we have Emma Bolch presenting to us the ownership of telecommunication industry, and today we have you presenting the mapping the Indonesian media industry. My question is, in this convergence media, in this convergence digital environment, how the Indonesian media and telecommunication industry should be mapped? I mean, the two presentations seems to be discrete, separated between Emma and Ross. But if we read like literature about convergence, scholars say that convergence leads to the integration between media and telecommunication industry.
Yep, I got it. Yeah,
how
thanks.
Do you see this happen in Indonesia?
Good point. I think the interesting thing about telcos is that they're really feeling under threat by over-the-top OTT or over-the-top messaging applications. So WhatsApp, for example, is an internet, a way that you text your friends via the internet versus paying through messaging via telcos. So the big telcos are under threat of these BBM being bought up by big conglomerates. And so I think really this is happening all across industries. WeChat's looking to have short, or has short payments. So you can pay quickly to your friends. You know, Marcus, can I have some pulsar? And he kind of sends me some pulsar, but more broadly, so banks are worried about these digital conglomerates. You know, telcos are worried about them because people, what they're trying to do is anytime you go online, you use this one company or this one app, ideally, right? They're thinking, we want you to have one app, and anything that you do online is going to be that app. Now, they're not going to be successful. There's going to be competition. But generally, this is scaring other industries because of the ease of which communications is made. That, again, the media, the idea of just a media conglomerate is perhaps dying.
Okay, so since Ross will be leaving us, please join me in thanking him for a very good presentation. He might not be as rich as Zuckerberg, but in terms of presentational style, he's getting there. So next speaker will be Usman Hamid.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Very good to be back here. I remember what a lovely setting it was when I spent my time at ANU. Marcus was my supervisor, the chair of the panel. And the fact that he is now also the chair of my panel has made me feel like I'm a student again. An everlasting student. So today I'm going to talk about state crackdowns online. I'm assessing the impact of the rise of social media to the quality of freedom of expression in post-Suharto Indonesia. So I will begin by setting the scene about the rising profile of social media and its positive impact. And then second, I will go into some areas of expression that explains how and why the state, I believe, is pushing back against critical dissenters in Indonesia. And third, I'll talk about some pushback using legal and non-legal instruments. In this context, I will also briefly talk about main drivers behind such pushbacks. And finally, some conclusion. So let me refresh what has been stressed by other speakers on Indonesia's rise of social media. Here you have internet penetration, Facebook penetration, and mobile connections. If you look into the mobile connections, I'm sure every Indonesian here have more than 2 devices of mobile phones. So, well, this shows how Indonesians welcome the emergence of the new technology, of the internet, of the mobile phone, and particularly on social media. And this also, for freedom of expression, it means that Indonesia, despite of the level of penetration remaining low compared with other advanced economies, the high level usage of social media shows that for freedom of expression, this means relatively high level access to access information, to impart information, to receive information, and to express opinions. So the rise of social media activism has been also echoed by particularly the anti-corruption commission campaigns that was successful a couple of years ago, and also the Prita Mulyasari case, a successful campaign in solidarity with a housewife who was arrested for criticizing a hospital. And the recent one during Yudhoyono, there was a pressure from social media users to Yudhoyono as a president on Twitter to ask him to revoke the decision in the Parliament not to abolish the right to vote, the right to directly vote for local election. So the driving question behind, or the driving questions of my talk is, how has social media affected the quality of freedom of expression? Or has the rise of social media improved the quality of freedom of expression? I will argue that while social media has expanded the space for citizens to express their views, this progress was counterbalanced through the state and non-state crackdowns suffered by many online users. I'll give you some reasons or examples to explain this argument. So, there are pushback by the states, non-state affiliated actors through the legal and non-legal instruments. This graph shows while social media has undoubtedly had an impact on freedom of expression, there has also been a rise in a number of detention or prosecutions against citizens who have expressed their opinions and identities online. So here you can see both offline criminal defamation and online criminal defamation rose sharply since the adoption of the cyber law in 2008. This law included a defamation clause and therefore allowing for greater state crackdown on commentary online. And this law was specifically tailored to online posts and communication with severe punishment, 6 years imprisonment and $100,000 for fine. 23% of the lawsuit was filed by individuals, while 77% filed by groups, including religious social groups who felt that their patrons were being defamed. State officials were the second largest group of complainants, reported approximately 36% of these cases. Still, according to the NGOs, SafeNets, and the police, more activists are being criminalized. And the most recent one was Haris Azhar, the coordinator of Contras, a human rights group based in Jakarta, who posting information revealing illicit drugs trafficking involving military officials, state officials, and also police officials. So he was accused for defaming these three institutions and was almost became a suspect. So some other examples is that in almost all cases that I have examined, the legal proceedings were intertwined with social sanctioning, career-related punishment, and physical intimidation by supporters of the government official who had been criticized online. The guy with the hat is, the first one, is Budiman, a teacher who posted on Facebook that his district head of Pangkep in South Sulawesi was the most stupid region in the country. So he was physically attacked by the district head's bodyguards and cadres of local Golkar party. The mob also included dozens of members of Pemuda Pancasila, the notorious gangs of thugs groomed under Suharto's rule. So he was taken to the local police station for protection from the mob. But when he felt safe and requests to be released, the police informed him that he could go home at his own risk. So then the police detained him for defaming the district head based on a printout of Facebook comments that had been submitted by the district head staff. He apologized to the regents, and as a result, the case did not make it to sentencing. But others, like Fadli Rahim, did not get away so lightly. Rahim, in the middle, is a public servant who was critical of the district head of Goa in South Sulawesi. He wrote on a chatting application line that investors have canceled investment in Goa because there was no deal on the sharing of the commission, or there was no fees with the district head. So it has made him charged under the defamation. The head of Goa's public relations department stated that that's not criticisms. Rahim accused the district head of receiving fees, and that's incorrect. That shows that he is a staff who is disloyal to his superiors. So Rahim was sentenced to 8 months imprisonment in February 2015. But the mobilizations sentiments against Rahim was not limited to statements. Prior to Rahim's sentencing, dozens of thugs used iron and wooden sticks, broken glass bottles, and stones to damage the vehicle driven by protesters in support of Rahim. The police took no action to stop the violent attack. Rahim's upper arms badly scratched by the prison wardens. He had to pay for his food in prison, and he was jailed in a small dirty cell. Rahim and his mother were demoted in their respective bureaucratic positions. Rahim's rank was lowered, while his mother, Rukmini Usman, who had been a public servant and an English teacher for 30 years, was removed from her longtime high school to a school some kilometers further away from the city. So once more, a mixture between legal persecutions, social marginalization, intimidation, and abuse was directed against social media users or social media activists considered hostile by the elite, and in this case, and in many other cases, a local government head. The most well-known example of state crackdowns on social media commentary involved an atheist, Alexander Irwant, from West Sumatra, a province known for its Islamic piety and for its local discriminatory regulation implemented against Ahmadiyya in 2008 and 2011. So Aan learned of atheism through an online discussion forum entitled Faith Freedom Indonesia. In 2009, he found people with the same concern and joined Atheist Minang, a Facebook fan page for atheists targeting West Sumatra's dominant ethnic group. His posting included criticisms about Islam Muslimology, and he intensified his online activity questioning the existence of God, including posting on the scientific errors in Islam or Muhammad is attracted by his own daughter-in-law. In early 2012, Aan was attacked by an angry mob at his office, triggered by the conservative group that had received reports about Aan's posting. They came in droves, around 40 people, beat him, and shouted, "Infidel, burn," and so on. So the head of the youth gangs forced Aan to open his Facebook accounts. The police came an hour later and eventually took him to the police station to save him from the mob. While the police initially seemed unsure about what to do with Aan, the local Ulama Council, MUI, and customary institutions urged the police to take legal action. The chairman of local MUI in West Sumatra branch, Samsul Bahri Hatib, stated, "It hurts the whole Minang community. The basic principle of religion has been destroyed. This is contrary to Pancasila. Atheism is certainly not acceptable in Indonesia." Aan was then detained and prosecuted for insulting the Islamic religion, encouraging others to embrace atheism, and further charges for provoking hatred against religious, racial, and groups under the cyber law. So he was sentenced to 18 months, and in 2013, the Supreme Court rejected his appeal. And this was the first time for an atheist had been jailed in Indonesia for self-identifying as an atheist and sharing their view. And this pushback against atheist Aan not only temporarily cost him his freedom, they also took away his livelihood. Aan lost his job and he had to move to Jakarta. Aan's case sends shock waves across Indonesia, discouraging anyone with similar beliefs from putting their own views forward. And the Aan case has to be measured not by its singularity, but by the impact on those who decided to subsequently self-restrict their freedom of expression. And moreover, while Aan's atheism case stood out for its rareness, many more Indonesians have been prosecuted, socially sanctioned, intimidated, or otherwise disadvantaged because they express views that the state or mainstream religious leader classified as heretic. So the threat of severe sanctions on the exercise of freedom of expression regarding atheism or criticisms of religious orthodoxy on social media effectively makes all new opportunities in this area unusable, except for those Indonesians who operate at international rather than domestic level. And lastly, I won't go into some other cases such as communism or LGBTI rights, which has been mentioned by other speakers. In Papua case, you see in this graph, this is an attachment document from the military request to the ICT Ministry to block websites deemed as separatists in 2014, and it's still being blocked until 2015. So the question is, what about the impact of social media? Has the rise of social media improved the quality of freedom of expression in a province like Papua? The answer is a complex one. On the one hand, social media has facilitated communication between pro-separatist groups and individuals. And given the Papua's difficult terrain and political circumstances prior to the availability of social media, separatist groups were heavily localized and often didn't know each other's existence. Highland separatists, for example, had very poor connection with coastal pro-independence groups, and even within the highland itself, groups were frequently operating only in a particular valley. So social media has enabled separatist groups to coordinate their activities and discussion across local and regional boundaries. But on the other hand, as you can see here, the rise of social media has come with considerable risk. There have been no prosecutions such as in Java or in South Sulawesi, but there has been continues to be a litany of prosecutions against pro-separatist activists in Papua, with their online mobilization leading towards offline events that authorities then used to build a criminal case. Surveillance of separatists has also been made easier by the rise of social media. One example is suarapapua.com. Okay, so this website attracted lots of traffic, and the founder, Pogao, has been very proud of it. And I said, maybe there's a kind of surveillance in your website. So he tracked it to Google Analytics, and apparently he found that more than 80% of the user accessing his website coming from the Ministry of Defense. So if you have social media accounts, don't be happy first if you have traffic or followers, because there might be some users who do the surveillance rather than listening to your expressions. So in Papua case, by monitoring online platforms, authorities now have a good idea about when activities are planned and who is participating. The quality of freedom of expression for post-social media separatists in Papua has only improved if compared to the brutal military campaigns of the 1970s. It has stagnated and even declined, however, if measured against the late New Order period or the Papuan Spring of the 1990s and 2001. So the Papuan case then shows the limitations of social media. In overall, I concluded that in defective democracies such as Indonesia, weak rule of law, tradition of violence, and patterns of oligarchizations, including immovable or ideological immobility within the conservative elites, has prevented or continued to constrain internet users in their efforts to engage productively and freely in online discourses. And these are the reasons why the effect of social media have been so limited. To be sure, of course, social media has expanded the space for citizens to express their views. But this progress was counterbalanced through the state and non-state crackdown. And thus, social media rarely leads to significant leaps in the quality of freedom of expression or the overall democratic quality in Indonesia. Rather, solid democratic conditions need to be in place in order for social media to develop its full liberating potential. So we need mental revolution before digital revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Usman. So floor is open for questions. Yes, number one, Luke. Anyone else? So we start with two questions first.
Hello, John Postel from RMIT. I'm wondering about the prospects for secularism, atheism in Indonesia. This is a topic that came up many times when I was in Indonesia. questions to do with agnosticism, atheism. I often discuss these issues, but it seems to me that the general response from academia and civil society is that Indonesia is a really religious country. It will always be a religious country. There's no future for a secularist movement or for the spread of secularist ideals and practices. Are there any pockets of secularism via social media that seem to be doing well, or what are the prospects? Thanks.
Thank you, John. That's a very good question. There are two examples, or there are two evidence which I can share with you here. One is the website of Indonesian atheists. So Indonesian atheists consists of Indonesian young generations who have transformed their belief from their religious belief into atheist, agnostic, and other non-religious. The second case is the website of Jaringan Islam Liberal, JIL, founded by one of the young intellectual in Indonesia, Ulil Absar Abdallah, as also Lutfi Ashakani. So these websites disseminates articles or reports about atheisms in Indonesia, as well as atheism across the globe, like in Saudi Arabia or in the Middle East. And it attracted thousands of traffics every month, including these atheist discourses. But the difference between the first website and the second website, the first website, the users or most of the members operate in anonymous. So they did not identify their self-identifying atheists. But on the second ones, the writers of these blogs, the writers of atheist discourse, have nothing to do with believing in atheism. They just disseminated the discourse on atheism. And therefore, the future or the prospect of atheism, I think, is still very limited, given the rising intolerance, given the rising numbers of radical religious groups such as FBI and others. Thank you.
Do you see a role for Australia in supporting freedom of expression in Indonesia, or is this something that the role of foreign actors is going to be very, very limited in?
Yeah, I think from human rights point of view, there are a number of diplomatic dialogue, including the Lombok Treaty between Indonesia and Australian government, which can be a venue to discuss or to deliver the support to Indonesia in improving the quality of freedom of expression. Australia can also, I think, extend its support financially through the FAT and others to human rights or civil society organization. I think in Sydney Jones organization, IPAC also received a significant amount of funds from Australia, and it is now researching about the importance of online extremism, which I think NAFA will share further about it. Thank you.
Okay, more questions? Yes, please, number 2. We get the microphone, please, here.
I just wanted to ask Jordan,
Can you just wait for the microphone? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jordan from the Office of National Assessments. I did want to ask as well about what role, like a lot of your talk has been about how the state can play a very negative role in restricting freedom of speech. Does the state actually have a role in a positive role in restricting freedom of speech? The reason why I ask this is that amongst the examples you gave of restricting freedom of speech of communists, atheists, Papuan activists, one of the other things which the government did do earlier this year was ban around about 18 extremist and Islamist websites in Indonesia. This was actually quite a spread. There were very out-and-out extremist, very violent websites. There are also relatively benign Islamic websites like Dakwatuna and things like that. So to what extent does the state actually have a positive role to play in restricting freedom of speech, particularly speech which can lead to incitement, I suppose? Thank you.
Thank you. There has been a number of policies, including within the police, issuing a policy that bans freedom of hate speech, for example. But it has been unclear the limits of hate speech in that policy. For example, the police decree included defamation as part of the clauses of hate speech. On the other hand, there has been a number of websites deemed as terrorist or extremist website have been banned, have been blocked by the government, which received positive responses from the civil society in preventing violent action or in preventing further self-radicalizing terrorists in Indonesia.
And final question, Richard Chauvel, please, the microphone.
Thanks very much, Usman. A couple of quick questions. One, the incident a couple of months ago in Papuan student asrama in Jogja, that seemed to involve not only state security, principally the police, but also the mobilization of militia and the role of social media. So perhaps is there comparisons to be made from the West Sumatran example that you cited, also being used against Papuans? My second question is, how effective has the state been in blocking international websites about Papua and the communication between activists in Papua and internationally? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. First, I think Java or in Yogyakarta has been the central area for Papuan pro-independence activists to mobilize protests in support of Papuan pro-independence group recently in Jakarta as well. So the difference between the use of social media in West Papua and in Java is in West Papua, in the case of West Papua National Committee, KNPB, led by Victor Yemu, it has been effectively used social media, not only to express their political opinions, not only to expose abuses that attracted state response to hold a trial, for example, but also to mobilize hundreds or thousands of students to block the streets. But as a result, the state authority arrested them, not for their online activism, but for their offline activism. On the other hand, in Yogyakarta, this is the center area where activists in Papua face difficulties in accessing, for example, cyber cafes in West Papua to upload abuses of military, etc. But so far, the use of social media in Papua has been widely everywhere. But on the second question regarding the effectivity of the state blocking, the record is mixed. On one hand, the state did not stop the websites. I mean, the website can still be monitored by the states, but the website is just a tool for the states to monitor or to track their activisms. Or in a worst case, in Sorong, for example, Martinus Yohame, 26-year-old, the leader of the KNPB, he was found dead a week after he had responded to a message in his Facebook accounts to meet with two persons from claimed to be journalists and claimed to be Komnas HAM. So the day he met with this person from Facebook Communications, he was disappeared. And 6 days later, he was found dead. And that shows, I believe, the strong connection or the effectivity of the state using technological devices, not only to track, but to eliminate pro-separatist activists.
Okay. Before we thank Usman, let me remind you that there's no break after this session, so we go straight into the next and final session. So please remain into your seats, and please, chair of the next session and the speakers, get ready to come to the front. But now it's time to thank Usman Hamid for a wonderful presentation.